let us now make our voices heard. I pledge to serve and to push my country. I pledge to live like a citizen.
Hello, everyone. We're going to begin. Welcome to Civic Saturday. My name is Janae Kane. I am the co-instigator of this fabulous event, and we are just so grateful that you are here today. There's a lot going on in Seattle today. I think Lunar New Year celebrations, and we get to say goodbye to that glorious hunk of concrete. I'm going to go walk it at 4 o'clock. Anyone else going up there today to walk? I know people are running. Who already did? Wait, like officially, or did you climb up there? Okay. I heard there was a great party on the day it closed. Some of our folks were there. I love that Seattle is still weird enough for that. So goodbye, Viaduct. I'm so happy. Here is what I want to know. If this is your first time here today at Civic Saturday, please stand up. All right. Stay standing. So that means if you are sitting, stand up and welcome the person next to you who is standing now and say, hello, we're glad you're here. All right, thank you for doing that. We're so happy when new people show up, and we are so grateful for those of you who are coming back again and again. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our poet in residence, Na.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Yeah. Usually I don't say that. I'm like, peace. But, I just felt like I should do that. I don't know. All right, so the first things first. We're going to take a moment. And in this moment, if you are comfortable, I would like you to close your eyes and settle in within yourself. I want you to think about your worth. I want you to think about how much you are worthy. And the baby agrees. I want you to remember that you are worthy of rest, that you are worthy of peace, that you are worthy of time for yourself, that you are worthy to say no. You are worthy to say no. You are worthy to say no when it doesn't feel right. You are worthy to say no when you know that someone is not acknowledging your worth. You are worthy. You are worthy. You are worthy. And with that thought, with that remembrance, I would like you to breathe in deeply and breathe out deeply. You are worthy. Now I welcome you to open your eyes when you are ready. With that ritual of words reminding us of the things that we need to know and remember, I would like to bring up a guest poet to this stage where he will continue that ritual of words. Troy Osaki is a Filipino-Japanese-American poet, community organizer, and attorney from Seattle, Washington. He's a Kundiman Fellow and a 3-time Seattle Poetry Grand Slam champion. His work is forthcoming and has appeared in the Bellingham Review, BuzzFeed, Drunk in a Midnight Choir, Moss, a Journal of the Pacific Northwest, and elsewhere. He writes in hopes to build a safe and just place to live in by uniting the people and reimagining the world through poetry. Feel free to connect with him on Instagram and Twitter at Troy Osaki. I have been gifted to see this man speak. You are getting a gift to hear this man speak. Please clap your hands and give it up for Troy Osaki.
Hello, good morning. Hello. Thank you, Nal, for opening up the space for us today. If you're excited for Civic Saturday, can you make some noise? Hey, beautiful. My name is Troy. I'll be sharing a poem with you today. And I'd like to apologize in advance. I have another performance at the University of Washington this morning as well, and we'll have to head out right after. And I'm particularly upset because I think any conversation about how we can engage with our communities in the world to make them a better place is always important. And I'd love to be here with you to do that. But I wish you well, and I wish the rest of the Civic Saturday year to go well as well. So with that in mind, I'd like to first honor the land we're on today, which is Indigenous land, specifically Coast Salish and Duwamish land. And I'd like to voice my support for the Indigenous folks who are facing their struggles here and all around the world. So this poem, one thing I think artists and writers can do, one of the most important things I think we can do is to reimagine the world for what's possible, right? And to speak that into existence. And so this poem is part of my efforts in doing that. It's inspired by a group of young folks from an organization called You Speak Seattle, and it's after Azura, Zora, Esther, and Shelby. And so I hope y'all enjoy. Thanks for having me. And let's rock. Remember when the revolution happened and every border built as a wall was torn down. Every detention center demolished, and in its place, a really good dance floor. Every mother once separated from her child is now not. We've disarmed the state, strung up their rifles, and made wind chimes of their weapons. Each song sounds like ceasefire, a chorus of checkpoints undoing themselves. Every glorified hall monitor is banished from patrolling any border. Now, the only bullet left is in reverse, and all the corpses with holes come back to us. Now, there is no such thing as immigration reform. The only policies passed are those encouraging every person forced to find work overseas to finally return home. And when they do, they have something to return home to. Foreign corporations have been evicted, and the brightest crops since colonization are blooming. Whole industries are breathing again. No nation occupies another nation. Military bases are sunken lands, and armored cars rust below the ocean. Drones are scraps of unflyable metal, each one reimagined as a spaceship by every child it couldn't kill. Lorena blurts out a brilliant smile. Andres's chest is full of chuckles, and the shiny slide they're racing to the bottom of is made of melted down tanks. Something, not a war, is taking their breath away now. Even the massive hole that once held a mosque before the airstrike holds a mosque again. And the hole next to it is a swimming pool. And when the president proposed to build a wall, we bent open his bank vaults, poured out his billions, and burned it in an oil drum instead. We built this world to be a better place than he ever could and made him watch. Now, whenever someone says cage or forced removal, what we mean is something no person has ever seen. Ice has become so ancient, it's nearly a myth. Every generation whispers its name softer than the last. Yesterday, I roamed the North Seattle Library and learned all of what the old world couldn't keep alive. The deportation hearing, the no-fly list, the interrogation room, wherever it is. We've banned all use of black cites and torture because we don't need them anymore. Remember, when the revolution happened, we don't plan on giving it back. So come, try and take this from us. Here, in the new world, we laugh, and this time, we mean it. Thanks, everyone.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Troy, for joining us today, and thank you, Na, for bringing Troy along and centering us this morning. Welcome to you all. I'm Tatum Fotheringill. I'm the program manager for Civic Saturday, and I'd like to take a second, especially since we have so many people joining us for the first time, to say hello and to also tell you a little bit about what Civic Saturday is all about. So, hopefully when you came in this morning, you found a program on your seat. And if you were joining us toward the start of the program, hopefully you found somebody you can share with or grabbed an extra. If you need one, maybe just like raise your hand a little bit and we'll get one to you because those will be useful later on. But I'd like to also thank El Centro de la Raza for having us here in this wonderful space and being a partner with us this year on Civic Saturday. So why do we gather in this way here at Civic Saturday, in this different community gathering way? It's because at Citizen University, we believe that this moment in time calls for fellowship and connecting around our common civic purpose, that strong democracy depends on strong citizens. That's you all. We gather to challenge each other, to connect, and to reflect. By being here, we are choosing not to succumb to the moral cynicism that has taken hold of American civic life. We are declaring that there can be another way, and by being here with us today, you are helping us build what that other way can look like. So thank you for building with us. Yes. For the next few minutes, we are going to have time to connect with each other. You'll have about 8 minutes to converse with a neighbor, hopefully somebody you don't know already, meet somebody new. So introduce yourselves and take about 4 minutes each to talk about what does freedom mean to you? So I'll get back up here and remind you to switch and then tell you when our 8 minutes is coming to a close. But for now, meet somebody new and talk about this wonderful question.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kayla. Welcome. We're so glad to see so many people here this morning. So as Tatum said, what we're going to do next before Eric comes up to do his civic sermon is we're going to have 4 readers to come up here to do 2 readings of civic scripture. So we have 2 pieces that are Frederick Douglas excerpts, and we have 2 pairs that are going to read those 2 pieces together. So I'd like to first invite Sonia and Jen, and then Lynn and Deanne, and you can all come up together.
Good morning. This first reading by Frederick Douglass is an excerpt from Oration in Memory of Abraham Lincoln. delivered April 14th, 1876 at Washington, D.C. It must be admitted, truth compels me to admit, even here in the presence of the monument we have erected to his memory, Abraham Lincoln was not, in the fullest sense of the word, either our man or our model. In his interests, in his associations, in his habits of thought, and in his prejudices, he was a white man. He was preeminently the white man's president, entirely devoted to the welfare of white men. He was ready and willing at any time during the first years of his administration to deny, postpone, and sacrifice the rights of humanity in the colored people to promote the welfare of the white people of this country. In all his education and feeling, he was an American of the Americans. He came into the presidential chair upon one principle alone, namely, opposition to the extension of slavery. His arguments in furtherance of this policy had their motive and mainspring in his patriotic devotion to the interests of his own race. To protect, defend, and perpetuate slavery in the states where it existed, Abraham Lincoln was not less ready than any other president to draw the sword of the nation. He was ready to execute all the supposed guarantees of the United States Constitution in favor of the slave system anywhere inside the slave states. He was willing to pursue, recapture, and send back the fugitive slave to his master, and to suppress a slave rising for liberty, though his guilty master was already in arms against the government. The race to which we belong were not the special objects of his consideration. Knowing this, I concede to you, my white fellow citizens, a preeminence in this worship at once full and supreme. First, midst, and last, you and yours were the objects of his deepest affection and his most earnest solicitude. You are the children of Abraham Lincoln. We are at best only his stepchildren, children by adoption, children by forces of circumstances and necessity.
Continuation. I have said that President Lincoln was a white man and shared the prejudices common to his countrymen towards the colored race. Looking back to his times and to the condition of his country, we are compelled to admit that this unfriendly feeling on his part may be safely set down as one element of his wonderful success in organizing the loyal American people for the tremendous conflict before them and bringing them safely through that conflict. His great mission was to accomplish two things. First, to save his country from dismemberment and ruin. Second, to free his country from the great crime of slavery. To do one or the other, or both, he must have the earnest sympathy and the powerful cooperation of his loyal fellow countrymen. Without this primary and essential condition to success, his efforts must have been vain and utterly fruitless. Had he put the abolition of slavery before the salvation of the Union, he would have inevitably driven from him a powerful class of the American people and rendered resistance to rebellion impossible. Viewed from the genuine abolition ground, Mr. Lincoln seemed tardy, cold, dull, and indifferent. But measuring him by the sentiment of his country, a sentiment he was bound as a statesman to consult, he was swift, zealous, radical, and determined.
Also from Frederick Douglas, excerpt from The Self-Made Man, delivered in 1872, first written in 1859. The lesson taught at this point by human experience is simply this, that the man who will get up will be helped up, and the man who will not get up will be allowed to stay down. This rule may appear somewhat harsh, but in its general application and operation, it is wise, just, and benevolent. I know of no other rule which can be substituted for it without bringing social chaos. Personal independence is a virtue, and it is the soul out of which comes the sturdiest manhood. But there can be no independence without a large share of self-dependence, and this virtue cannot be bestowed. It must be developed from within. I have been asked, how will this theory affect the Negro, and what shall be done in his case? My general answer is, give the Negro fair play and let him alone. If he lives, well. If he dies, equally well. If he cannot stand up, let him call down.
I have said, give the Negro fair play and let him alone. I meant all that I said and a good deal more than some understand by fair play. It is not fair play to start the Negro out in life from nothing and with nothing, while others start with the advantage of 1,000 years behind them. He should be measured not by the heights others have obtained, but from the depths from which he has come. For any adjustment of the seals of comparison, fair play demands that to the barbarism from which the Negro started shall be added 200 years heavy with human bondage. Should the American people put a schoolhouse in every valley of the South and a church on every hillside, and supply the one with teachers and the other with preachers, for 100 years to come, they would not then have given fair play to the Negro.
Good morning. Good morning. Join me again in thanking our readers who, those of you who are, yes. Those of you who've been to Civic Saturday before know that those were unusually long and dense readings that we had for that moment of civic scripture. And there was a purpose to them. And so we just, first of all, I appreciate the care and presence with which our readers voiced those words of Frederick Douglass and the care and attention with which you heard them. This morning, in hearing these two lengthy texts from Douglass, I want to explain why I selected them. First of all, I just spent the last 8 weeks since we were last met at Civic Saturday, making my way through this epic new biography of Frederick Douglass by David Blight, the Yale historian. A truly great and complex book about a truly great and complex man. So, first of all, there's no way I'm going to not talk about Frederick Douglass today and not share with you some of the thrill of that biography and not try to entice you into some of the ache of carpal tunnel syndrome that you get from carrying an 800-page book around for 2 months. But the second reason I chose those excerpts for Civic Saturday today is, of course, that we are now in the second day of Black History Month, or as I like to think of it, American History Month. It is impossible to know the breadth and the depth of the history of our nation without knowing the ways that enslaved Africans and generations of their descendants not only built the nation and the nation's wealth, not only put the pretty words of our Constitution to the test, not only redeemed our American creed by their deeds, but in so doing created the possibility of liberation for people of every color and caste. Now, I said the possibility of liberation. And here's the third reason why we heard the words of Douglass this morning. Both those excerpts from great Douglass speeches were, in a sense, split in half. It's why we divvied the task of reading each text to two voices. Each excerpt, like Douglass himself, was of two minds about liberation. He was a fiercely uncompromising abolitionist who saw that Lincoln started out as the white man's president and who had the guts to say so at a memorial ceremony attended by all the white men leading the nation in 1876. Talk about speaking truth to power. At the same time, he was a savvy political player who came over time to appreciate why a president had to compromise and answer to the whole nation and not only to the abolitionist or the slave. Douglass was at once a believer in self-reliant, rugged black individualism, a forerunner to Booker T. Washington and Clarence Thomas, and, at the same time, a believer in the mutual collective obligation of the entire nation to make things right for the freed men and women of the South. purist and pragmatist, outsider and insider, seemingly self-made, yet acutely aware that no one is ever truly self-made. In today's readings, Douglas revealed himself to be as spiritually divided and morally ambivalent as any American ever was, living or dead. And he reveals to us the immense difficulty of true liberation from the patterns of the past, from the certainties of political ideology and theological principle, from the pulsing flesh and blood immediacy of one's own I and I. Liberation is the theme that I want to explore this morning, but I want to explore it in the fullness of an arc that runs from slavery to liberation to freedom, in which liberation is merely the turning point, the choice point. That arc is the story of Frederick Douglass. It is also the birthright and the burden of every American, living or dead. Let me begin with slavery. To read one of Frederick Douglass's autobiographies, and he wrote several over his long life, is to be confronted on a personal scale with the terror of enslavement and the brutality of the enslaver. But to read David Blight's biography, which sets the life of Douglass in the context of his times, is to be reminded that slavery was called the peculiar institution because it was an institution. It was a system, a depersonalized, society-wide web of laws, rules, and daily social norms, and by deep currents, powered by deep currents of money, and backed by the organized violence of the state. The perpetuators of that institution were not only the tyrannical enslavers on their lush plantations. The conspiracy was deeper and wider than that. Every banker and every worker in every cotton mill in the North, every New England college endowed by blood money, every Christian congregation across the territory that made allowances for accommodation with the slave power, all were parts, if not pillars, of the peculiar institution. Every unenslaved person who benefited from coerced, uncompensated labor was complicit, which meant every unenslaved person was complicit. Consider the Fugitive Slave Law. Its enactment as part of the Compromise of 1850 and the civil disobedience that followed all across the country accelerated the arrival of civil war. But before the Fugitive Slave Law was a law, it was a clause in the Constitution. Article 4, Section 2, Clause 3. You can look it up. It's still there. No person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. Those words remain in our great founding document. And that clause, each word of which was contested at the Constitutional Convention to avoid the word slavery and to avoid the appearance that the federal Constitution explicitly sanctioned slavery, that clause was not self-executing. It required and thus invited congressional legislation to put it into effect. In other words, it was a calamity waiting to happen. As the Russian playwright Anton Chekhov said, "One must never place a loaded rifle on the stage if it isn't going to go off. It's wrong to make promises you don't mean to keep." Well, the Fugitive Slave Clause sat there like a loaded rifle for 63 years until Congress in 1850 enacted it into law. And as in one of Chekhov's dramas, that inciting incident released a cascade of tragic consequence. John Brown's raid, bloodshed on the floor of Congress, the Dred Scott decision, the normalization of secession and disunion talk. Looking back, as if at the end of a Chekhov play, or for that matter, at the end of the Old Testament, we feel a sense of inevitability about the self-destruction of the institution of slavery and the ultimate arrival of emancipation. One of the gifts of reading about those years from the vantage point of Frederick Douglass the fugitive slave who became the most famous abolitionist on earth, is remembering that when you're in the middle of events, when you're in the thick of the fight, when a million unseen choices and acts are converging and colliding in ways you cannot predict, when a million loaded and unloaded rifles are on stages everywhere, nothing at all is inevitable. Today, you and I are in the middle of events, in the thick of many fights, amidst such a rolling churn of choice and consequence. So I ask you, what institution today is as all-surrounding and as corrosively enmeshed in everyone's lives as slavery was then? What institution today dominates us so entirely that we have a hard time imagining extricating ourselves from complicity in its destructive effects? What institution today dominates us to the point where we tolerate evil on a daily basis? One answer that's become increasingly popular is neoliberal, carbon-spewing, inequality turbocharging, casino-style consumer capitalism. I'm rather partial to that answer, and my policy preferences show it. But another answer out there is this: neo-Marxist, liberty-stifling, enterprise-choking, millennial chic state socialism. And I refuse to automatically demonize everyone who offers this answer. What Frederick Hayek called the road to serfdom, government intervention into the workings of the economy, Franklin Roosevelt called the path to the four freedoms. What Citizen Ronald Reagan called in his famous 1964 speech, A Time for Choosing, called the ant heap of totalitarianism, President Lyndon Johnson that very same summer called the Great Society. What capitalist Howard Schultz deems un-American about socialist Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's call for 70% top marginal tax rate, President Dwight Eisenhower once called responsible economics, not communism. What does it mean when what one person calls freedom, another person calls slavery? For starters, it might mean that we are all becoming too fundamentalist in our beliefs. The fortunes of billionaires, like the prospects for single-payer health care, are today more than ever political and moral Rorschach tests. How you see those ink blots assigns you to one of two tribes, within which certitude, rather than doubt, is the coin of the realm. It also means that we should more searchingly ask ourselves what liberty is and is for, so that we don't too casually label the thing we don't like slavery or serfdom. Frederick Douglass, on his trips to England, Scotland, and Ireland to raise funds for the abolitionist cause, would politely but firmly correct his Irish hosts, who said that their treatment under British rule was a form of slavery. No, he said, only slavery, the institution he was born into and had escaped from, only slavery is slavery. Don't get sloppy with your concepts. Douglass knew not only the difference between real slavery and metaphorical slavery, he knew also the difference between liberation and freedom. And that is what I want to turn to next: liberation. There's a reason why the effective date of the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863, was and still is called Jubilee Day. The formal end of enslavement is a thing to be celebrated and to be commemorated with odes to joy. But remember this: liberation isn't freedom. It is only the removal of oppression. Think about other great moments of liberation in living memory. The liberation of France and Germany from Nazi control was not enough to make Western Europe free. It took the Marshall Plan and NATO to do that. The fall of the Berlin Wall liberated Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union to become what exactly? The toppling of Saddam Hussein liberated Iraqis from his dictatorship, but resulted in something far, far short of freedom. And don't get me wrong, humanity is immeasurably better off without the tyranny of the Third Reich, the USSR, and the Ba'athist regime. My point is only this. The opposite of tyranny is not freedom. The opposite of tyranny is the void. A void created by the absence of controls. Within that void, freedom, true freedom, is indeed one possible eventual outcome. But it is far from the most likely or the easiest to achieve. What fills that void first and most easily? Loneliness and isolation, consumerism, addictive entertainments, addictive drugs. Also, nativist nationalism and racist scapegoating. Also, religious and partisan fanaticism. Also, counter-revolution by the organized forces of tyranny. And also, a willingness, maybe even a yearning, among some of the liberated to be guided anew by a strong hand. Consider the course of the French Revolution, from liberation to a renaissance of tyranny. Consider the similar story of the Arab Spring in Egypt and Libya. Consider how much happier most Russians have been under Putin's efficient authoritarianism than they were under Yeltsin's chaotic proto-democracy. Those Russians were liberated, but never free. I can relate. We Americans today are also liberated, but not quite free. We have fewer restraints upon us than Americans of prior centuries did. Heck, we may be the most liberated, unrestrained society in human history. Yet still, you and I flail in the void, pulled magnetically between poles of hyper-individualism and obedient conformity. The Notre Dame political philosopher Patrick Deneen wrote a powerful, sharp-edged book last year about this, called Why Liberalism Failed. Though he's politically and culturally conservative, the liberalism he refers to in his title is not what we think of as left liberalism or progressivism. He means the older philosophy of classical liberalism, a philosophy of free markets and free individuals that was born in rebellion against kings and churches and aristocratic estates and fixed classes. In Deneen's telling, this philosophy of classical liberalism is admirable to the extent that it throws off tyranny and invites democracy. But it contains within it the seeds of its own destruction. It first teaches people to shed their ties of culture and affinity and place and family and obligation and faith to enter the wide-open marketplace as individualistic free agents. It then convinces them that they can thrive in this market and in the world as autonomous individuals, detached from commitments to others. When they fail to thrive, and when inequality becomes too severe, this insatiable ideology of liberalism then opens the door to an ever-growing government and to ever more dominating corporations that promise us more security and more stability. And eventually, we, these citizens, by trading our liberty for security, lose both. This narrative of liberation and its betrayal cannot easily be put in a left-right grid. Big government and concentrated globalized power are not, in this telling, enemies. They are codependents, feeding off one another. Patrick Deneen and a growing number of people on the political right are starting to challenge the free market's free trade orthodoxy of modern conservatism. He sometimes seems as suspicious of rent-seeking monopolists on Wall Street and in Silicon Valley as Elizabeth Warren or Shama Sawant. And his preferred solution, a return to local control, to a sense of place and its traditions, to economic and cultural activity, return to a human scale, his solution can sound very Seattle. But it can also lead, if you read closely, to outcomes not very Seattle. For instance, Deneen doesn't want government to punish a baker for refusing on religious principle to sell a cake to a gay couple. He leaves unaddressed the question of how he would have responded to Jim Crow had he been a citizen of the South during the Civil Rights Movement. Jim Crow, after all, was a local culture of tradition and place and rootedness and heritage par excellence. Regardless, though, Deneen is right that what's fashionably called neoliberalism today, a blind faith in markets and individualism, eats away at the foundations of family, identity, citizenship, faith, and the dignity of work. Freedom is choosing, but that does not mean that choice is freedom. True freedom sometimes means that we choose to have fewer choices, to restrain ourselves with bonds of obligation. Now, when I said earlier that liberation is the pivot in our journey, the choice point, what I meant was that the removal of tyranny creates only an opportunity for us to choose whether to live like a free citizen, capable of discernment, or to fall into the unfreedom that results both when government is too strong and when it is too weak. Now this, the true meaning of freedom, is the last topic I want to explore with you today. Here's what I believe. Freedom is responsibility. Let me repeat that in big letters. Freedom is responsibility. It is more than the removal of restraints. It is more than procedural rights to be let alone, more than getting to call yourself whatever label you want. True freedom is freely chosen encumbrance and duty to others. Now, I know this is not how most Americans think of freedom. And to explain why I see things this way, let me tell you about a photograph I have on my desk at home, at the home office. It's an old 3x5 picture of my father mowing the lawn on the slope of our wide front yard in my childhood home. In the background is the street that we lived on, Old English Way, and the colonial house and sloped yard across the street. The year is 1990. Why do I keep this photo? Well, for one thing, it is a picture of the last summer I was with my dad. I had just graduated from college. I was home for 2 months before I'd be starting work in Washington, D.C. A year later, he would be dead, felled suddenly and unexpectedly by an illness that had gradually, over many years, weakened him. On some level, I understood the fragility of things, even though it was unspoken, which is perhaps why I snapped a photo of such a mundane scene, a suburban moment as a lawn mowing. But I keep that picture also to remind me about all that I have inherited as an American with the dumb luck to be born on this soil in the year 1968. In that photo, my dad is wearing a long-sleeve shirt even though it's summer. That's because he wanted to hide the fistula on his arm that was necessary for the home dialysis that was necessary to keep him alive. He and we kept it a secret from his colleagues at IBM and from most of our friends and neighbors. He was proud. He didn't want people to know he was sick. But thanks to that home dialysis, he lived for 14 years after his end-stage kidney disease was diagnosed, far longer than doctors at the time ever imagined was possible. That he got so many years is because of what is now sometimes mocked as free health care, Medicare. That and his work at IBM, which was made possible by what is now sometimes derisively called free college. The universities of Illinois and Michigan, where he earned a bachelor's and a master's degree for just hundreds of dollars per year. Later, when my mother decided she wanted to go back to work, she also took advantage of so-called free college by taking computer science courses at the local state university branch in New Paltz. Soon she was an IBMer too. Let me draw your attention to some other parts of that photo. Our street, Old English Way, was part of a new suburban development in Wappingers Falls, New York, planned and carved out of the woods and meadows by a Swedish immigrant builder named Gus Josephson, and financed in part by federal loans and home mortgage interest deductions, by big government. In turn, the equity that then accumulated in our colonial house on 11 Old English Way helped send me to a private college. Across the street, at 16 Old English Way, was the Garrity family. 5 kids, including my first friend in the neighborhood, John, who taught me how to play baseball, how to ride a bicycle with gears, how to build a fort in the woods, how to fight back against a bully. John's dad, Jack, was older than my dad, but quite like my dad, and like most dads in Marywood, in our neighborhood, he was an IBMer. Jack had a quiet voice and a mild demeanor. His flat-top haircut was the only hint that he had fought in the Second World War. That, and his hobby of making models of warplanes, like the Flying Fortress bomber, in which he had been a tail gunner. Mr. Garrity taught me how to make model planes and model clipper ships with skill and attention to detail. He showed me how to store my paints and my glues in a well-ordered tackle box. And he rarely talked about the terrors that he had faced in that tail gunner's bubble during the war. But here was this suburban father who had raised a big family in this neighborhood because he had survived that war and been a beneficiary of the GI Bill. Now, I'm not trying to tell a tale here about the wonders of government alone. It wasn't just government that made our neighborhood thrive and made our lives for a stretch of years feel so secure. It was also the vitality of IBM in the 1970s and the 1980s. It was how hard all of us were working all the time. It was entrepreneurs like Mr. Josephson. It was the web of relationships on our street. Just as John looked out for me, Jack looked out for my dad. He knew my dad's secret. He never spoke of it. But when my dad was sick enough to be hospitalized from time to time, Jack would discreetly offer help. There was also on our street a general civic ethic of showing up. Jack's wife, Carol Garrity, a knitter and a club joiner par excellence, served for years on the town council and the sewer board. My parents were active in the Mid-Hudson Valley Chinese Association. All these things, not just government, mattered. But I tell you about this photo because we should think about free college and free health care and free housing not as wildly expensive pipe dreams, but as the one-time foundations of middle-class stability and prosperity in our country. I wouldn't call them a right, as some people do. I would actually call them a responsibility, a collective duty to create opportunity for all. Upon such a foundation, financed by very progressive taxation, each of us can then, yes, be free to choose, free to fail, free to thrive, free to reinvent ourselves or not, free to deal with what fortune brings. From that base of what Frederick Douglas called basic fair play, society will then get the windfall of everyone's talent and potential. My dad got to contribute for his too short life to the best of his great abilities, minus his own shortcomings and the vicissitudes of fate. I have gotten to contribute on the same terms. I submit to you that the United States is better off, more free, for having made these investments in my father and in my family. Now, of course, nothing is cost-free. Each of these building blocks has a price tag, and so does their absence. Grown-ups can talk about this honestly, which is why many politicians can't. Politicians, on one side, often see only taxes and spending without admitting the compounding social benefits. And politicians on the other side often name those benefits without ever really admitting the scale of redistribution needed to achieve them. We've got to start showing our leaders how to lead, how to talk more honestly about both costs and benefits, and about the trade-offs that all of us are willing, and perhaps unwilling, to make. Do you like Medicare for all? Well, then take seriously the principled arguments against it. Don't just get on the bandwagon and assume that your opponents are all selfish jerks. Do you hate the head tax that was passed and then repealed here in Seattle? Well, then consider what you'd propose instead if you had the responsibility for ending homelessness on current revenue? Because you do. Freedom is responsibility. It's a huge hassle, I know. How blessed we are to have such a hassle, to be so hassled. Let me conclude then with Douglas. After the Civil War ended, there was a period when Frederick Douglass felt adrift, without purpose. A lifetime of struggle had led to this titanic victory. But liberation was also disorienting, even strangely depressing. Sometimes he preached a social Darwinist gospel of self-help and told former slaves, as we heard earlier, that it was time for them to prove by hard work alone that they could be as fit as everyone else. Other times, though, he argued that hard work could work only when accompanied by hard investments of help by the government. That to be let alone was not simply to be unchained, but also to be granted 40 acres and a mule. And then later, when it became undeniable a dozen years after the Civil War, that whites, North and South, were conspiring to resubordinate black citizens under the banner of reunion and redemption. That became undeniable. Frederick Douglass found his voice and his purpose again. In this next chapter of his long life and career, Douglass remembered that to choose freedom is to commit to a course far more demanding than liberation. It is a course of citizenship. Citizenship means embracing the tension in Douglass's voice between self-help and mutual aid. Citizenship means knowing that sometimes one is more appropriate than the other. It means recognizing that if someone has a worldview that operates in one register only, whether it's all markets or all government, you should be dubious. Citizenship means that sometimes you must act like a single-minded advocate who can't be bothered with complexity, but doesn't have the burden of deciding. And sometimes you've got to act like a president or a mayor who can't escape complexity and who must decide. Citizenship means knowing that sooner or later, every society will get educated in civics. So you might as well get that education early on in a classroom rather than later on in a crisis. Finally, citizenship means today, as it did when Frederick Douglass gave his 1876 memorial oration about Abraham Lincoln, that each of us must summon the moral courage to call out hate and hypocrisy and summon the moral humility to see both in ourselves. The path from slavery to liberation to freedom is a path not of law and policy first, but a path of culture and norms and simple habits of the heart, reinforced by infinite choices by countless people to take ownership of ourselves and of our country. Walk that path. Let's walk it together. We are free to do so. Thank you.
That energy now into civic circles, which is a time where you all will form up groups of about 5, 6. Whoever ends up in your circle is meant to be in your circle. Turn your chairs, move off to the side if you need to hear folks better. A couple of ground rules. Listen to hear each other. Before you speak twice, try and let everybody else have the opportunity to speak once. And I'm going to go back to rule number 1. Listen to understand and hear one another. So the topic for today is, here we got the rules again. Good rules. How do you take responsibility for your community? So as you turn and form groups of 5 or 6, again, everybody who winds up is meant to be there. Find some new people. And we will come back in about 20 minutes, and I'll call you all back to do some wrap-up and community announcements. So have at it.
Everyone is doing porch pickups, and so I've like tried to like connect with the admins and like post on the group about like, hey, let's try, even though it's harder, to like meet people and start to cultivate those connections, even if it's just for like the 2 second you open the door and like talk to the person for a second.
So sometimes this kind of common feeling, you help each other, you support each other. That's actually more important to your life.
I just thought somebody's going to write a letter, and then I thought, how do I know somebody's going to write a letter? So I did it, and it was really crossing a threshold of responsibility to feel like, why not me?
Right, instead of letting somebody else do it.
So there's a difference between taking responsibility and serving your community, because you're serving your needs is serving what's an existing lack, the void. That's what he's talking about. And taking responsibility is building infrastructure and creation.
And I'm still very new to this. I mean, November was my first one, so I'm still kind of learning the ropes. But this is some of the most meaningful conversations I've been a part of have been with this group.
Thank you for having such robust and great conversations. Hope you enjoyed that and met some new folks. So as you see in your programs, our next Civic Saturday is going to be April 4th at the Impact Hub, April 6th at the Impact Hub. The rest of the dates for the year are on there as well. We'll be posting Eric's sermon and the readings this afternoon on our website and Facebook page, so if you want to go back and check that out or share, you may do so. With that, we will bring Na back up to close us out, and we will see you on April 6th at the Impact Hub.
Imagine it not costing anything that you can enjoy civil and political rights, that you are free from outside domination, that you are not judged by your nature or being. You are able and capable to choose. You are relieved from lack, especially anything that is burdensome. You are not bound, confined, or detained by force. There are no restrictions, no system that is opposed to you. You are not refused, blocked, or turned away by the structure of qualifications. You are not being used or occupied. You are not being hampered with or impeded. You are able to perform your beingness without an apparatus. There is no bondage here. You are moving and turning in any and every direction. You are the wind that blows. You are the rain that falls. You are the birds that eat. You are the sun that shines. And you are the moon that beams. You are free. You are free. You are free. You are free.